Welcome to the Second Reading Podcast from the University of Texas at Austin.
The Republicans were in the Democratic Party because there was only one party.
So I tell people on a regular basis, there is still a land of opportunity in America. It's called Texas.
The problem is, these departures from the Constitution, they have become the norm.
At what point must a female senator raise her hand or her voice to be recognized over the male colleagues in the room?
And welcome back to the Second Reading Podcast. I'm Jim Henson, Director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin. Very happy to be joined today by someone who's not been on the podcast before, Jasper Scherer. Jasper is a politics reporter for the Texas Tribune, though he is the politics editor-elect?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
You weren't really elected per se, that I would think.
No, that's not, to my knowledge, how they made the decision. But yes, incoming politics editor.
There we go, incoming. Okay, so, yeah, you haven't put it up for a popular vote.
Right, not yet.
Okay, you'll choose your moment like a parliamentary system. Good. So he will be the politics editor for the Texas Tribune starting in June. Jasper's been reporting on politics in Texas since at least 2017 that I'm aware of, and joined the Texas Tribune in 2024, and now joining management. So welcome, Jasper. I really appreciate you making the time to.
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd say a sporadic listener to the podcast, so I'm happy to be on.
Well, I think you're ahead of most in terms of the listenership. So, until you move to a corner office, you're still in the trenches at the Capitol. And right before we recorded this, you broke some news, shared a byline with Kayla Guo at the Tribune on Lieutenant Governor Dan Patr. So let's do some news first and tell us about that, what you found out.
So essentially, Kayla and I sat down with Patr in his office and had the opportunity to ask some questions about, basically these are kind of his two of his top pet issues, two of his top priorities this session, banning THC products across the state, and then, kind of tightening the state's bail laws, giving judges more discretion to deny bail. And what he told us is that he's essentially, ready to, and he has done this before. This is not a new maneuver for Dan Patr, but basically he will use his power as lieutenant governor to block, certain must-pass bills to force a special session, an overtime round, if it gets to the point where the House doesn't come around on those two issues. So I don't know. I'm not making any set in stone summer plans at the moment.
Yeah, it kind of puts a crimp in people's June plans. Now, on that hand, we were talking about this a little bit before we went on. I'm curious. You're not making summer plans, but you guys had good background in the story about the fact that, Lieutenant Governor's done this before. It's something that is in Lieutenant Governor's toolkits, if you will. I can't remember if you had a quote from the Lieutenant Governor, or you guys were pointing it out that, he can't call a special session. He's not constitutionally empowered to do that, but has been very good at, being a gatekeeper and knowing that he's got a chokehold. What do you were in the room with the guy. How'd you take it?
Yeah, I think there is an element of this that it could just be, this is sort of a bargaining chip. It allows him to establish his position a little more firmly when they start doing negotiations with the House. And it's worth noting that Patr and also the author, at least on the THC ban bill, they have both expressed some degree of confidence that, they're either on the same page with the House or they're going to get there. And you were sort of alluding to this before we went on. I do think there is a powerful incentive for folks to not, I think the people are going to pick and choose which hill they're going to die on this session, given how many overtime rounds they've been stuck with, I guess the last 4 years. This is a part-time legislature, as we all know, and, these folks have other jobs they need to get back to. So I don't know, that to me is not should not be glossed over when you're thinking about the factors or kind of the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in play here for me that, one is, and I would have to go back and look at this to make sure. I don't think this is 100%, but I always feel like there's more of an incentive to get the work done in the regular session, not have the stories be about the legislature and the governor not getting along or not being able to govern or whatever, when you're going directly into a big general election year. The off-year election when all the statewides are on the ballot. And so I think about that in play. And then I also think about something that's underlying even, both of our reactions to it, I think, and that's, a certain amount of PTS from the breakdown in the 2023 session and just how long that lasted, how many special sessions were there. Now, that was impacted by the Paxton impeachment, of course,
right.
but it's all kind of part and parcel of the same thing, and I think the same collective memory and the kind of collective trauma of the people in the building.
And you can tell just with the kind of the early tone that Dustin Burrows, the new speaker of this session, is setting with his relations with Patrick. The caveat that all of this can change and go south at any point as we get closer to May, but. Just he's by all accounts, they're still doing their big three breakfasts with Governor Abbott. The Patrick and Burrows converse fairly regularly. So I've heard, and I think and Burrows has. You mentioned the Paxton impeachment. He was, this is kind of maybe a political posturing thing, but it makes sense that he did it. He made a show of kind of turning over the audit records from the House to kind of assuage Dan Patrick. So I think, for now at least, the rubber hasn't really met the road on a lot of these bills, but you can tell that Burrows and the leadership in the House, a lot of whom were involved in all of those kind of endless negotiations. Burrows was, in the mix for those property tax discussions. They're eager to avoid that, I'm sure.
Well, that leads me directly to what I kind of wanted to go next, which is a vibe check. You described how all that seems a little more smooth. Are you finding that palpable in your reporting? Are people? Do you sense a little more? Harmony's too strong a word.
Yeah.
But a little less, just of the depth of the hostility and right. Everything was a conflict in 2023 by this time, I think,
right.
In the session, only got worse. It does seem like it's better.
I think so. I mean, yeah, the short answer is yes. I think everyone is, eager to, even just thinking about within the House with some of these new freshmen, kind of the firebrand, farther right crowd who came in, having campaigned on sort of upending the status quo in the House. Even, at least some of those folks are, just trying to be engaged as productive lawmakers on certain issues, as opposed to just coming down and just, burning the place down from the jump. So I think, and we saw some rumblings of censures by, local, county Republican parties that sort of quietly died down. And, that to me reflects just folks wanting to, who were critical of Burrows' predecessor, Dade Phelan, kind of wanting to give him a chance. So all that said, though, I think there is also, we're talking about the vibe, folks are starting to get maybe a little antsy about just, this always happens where the Senate jumps out to, they get all their priorities done and then the pressure is on the House to follow suit. And, but I think just maybe some of it is the session started a little later in January than we're used to. And, I'm hearing stuff about, maybe the House wants to get the budget out of the way before they jump on some of these other things. But, they with especially the private school voucher, the whatever you want to call it, education savings account bill still out there. I think until that gets resolved one way or another, everyone's going to be kind of walking on eggshells to an extent. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can be hard when you're in the middle of a session, I think, to separate the general rhythm of these sessions, which are, it's very structured. in a lot of ways. I mean, with variance, but very structured by the Constitution and the rules and what's particular to a given session, right? So you raised vouchers, and I think, we'll weave this vibe thing in and out a little because I want to come back to talking about the big three a little bit more. What's your read of where the vouchers thing is? It, on the surface of it, it seems like they're pretty close, like they pretty much have the votes. I think the ESA voucher, the / proponents,
right.
Are all guardedly optimistic, though in talking to some of those folks, nobody will go, yeah, it's going to happen.
Right.
Certainly not on the record, or even informally. We were like, yeah, it looks good, but...
Yeah.
But that, it seems like that's pretty much a done deal, failing, a Hail Mary procedural thing or the bottom falling out in some really unexpected way.
Yeah, I think that's more or less my impression. I mean, there is, I haven't really heard a super, I guess, compelling case from the Democrats that, actually this coalition, and it is a narrow coalition in the House of the folks who have officially signed on to support the House voucher bill, but I haven't really heard much in terms of like concrete opposition from Democrats. So it's more just, there's plenty of time for the bill to change, or, vaguely kind of some of these Republican votes are reluctantly on board. But it's, if you think about, the countervailing factors, I guess, with just looking at how Abbott went so scorched earth in such an unprecedented fashion, last primary session, and it just, it's the way the winds are blowing in a very clear direction right now. And I think maybe the one kind of big variable we're waiting for is like what the latest House draft of their bill looks like. Brad Buckley, the education chair, told us that, he just is expecting kind of technical changes on the version that'll eventually get sent to the House floor. And if that's the case, I would be surprised. I haven't seen anything to indicate there'd be, major defections in the House. Because
as of now, I mean, last I heard, they're looking at, they think they're planning on voting out of committee next Tuesday.
Right.
And then will be, the attention will turn to when the first calendars committee meeting will be in the House.
Right.
They're going to schedule the thing. I think vouchers is a good place to kind of weave back to the big three for a second. I mean, we heard one of the big leading indicators that the train seemed to be, if not leaving the station, ready to pull out. I guess it was last week when we heard kind of this joint announcement from the governor and the speaker. And as we look at the news you broke today of the lieutenant governor shooting up firing a couple shots across the bow on these key issues for him, and particularly what is the thing that nobody wants to hear because of the vibe we're talking about, which is, we'll hold this hostage for a special session. What do you make of the relationship between the big three? I mean, look, it's obviously better, and what used to be the niche interest in who's having breakfast together is now like a leading indicator of how well things are going. But kind of what's your sense of that? Because it still feels like the usual unstable triangle to me. It's just that the polarities have shifted a little bit. Yeah,
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, just thinking of, the new variable, obviously, in that the third, stool peg there is Burrows coming in. And, by all accounts, he's always had a great relationship with Governor Abbott. This is sort of a deep cut reference, but thinking back to when Burrows was kind of at his lowest point after he was involved in the, recording scandal where he and then Speaker Dennis Bonnen were caught, kind of scheming to go after certain Republicans in primaries. And
he was very unkind language in some cases.
Right. Yes. That is important context. But so he was, just in the eyes of his colleagues in the House, which, everything in that body comes down to, the reputation and trust you develop with, you're only as good as your word in the House. And Abbott just didn't really have to do this, but he came out and endorsed Burrows for re-election, right as all that stuff was happening. It's a small thing, but I think, and then thinking ahead to, the role Burrows played with, property taxes in 2019. His ties to Abbott go back a ways, and I think it was sort of a weird situation for the two of them with this the speaker race where Abbott was kind of trying to. My read on it was like he was trying to curry favor with the base, the folks on the right who were supporting Burrows' opponent, David Cook, but he didn't come out unequivocally support. It was sort of a guarded statement of support. So it sounds like those two at least are on the same page. And then, with Dan Patrick, it's kind of like every speaker he's worked with so far, things have fallen apart at some point. I'm having trouble remembering what the vibe was between Phelan and Patrick at the beginning, but it was, we saw that collapse in pretty dramatic fashion
and pretty fast.
Yeah, so it's sort of like their relationship is only as good as it actually as the House is doing what Dan Patrick wants and expects them to do. And the challenge for Burrows, like, it's really easy to see how this could theoretically fall apart if his coalition is overly reliant on the Democrats who voted for him, into the speakership. And some of these, I guess we could call them social issues, on Dan Patrick's priorities list. There's a lot of stuff on there that House Democrats who voted for Burrows kind of en masse, they're not going to like. So I don't know. It'll be fascinating to see how Burrows kind of tries to weave through those forces in the last 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, this is way too immediate and short term to think about, the chess game going on here. But it's hard for me not to notice that shortly after there are these signals in a reasonably public way, at least for the audience for this stuff, that of this relationship and the cooperation between Abbott and Dustin Burrows, that all of a sudden, we see the lieutenant governor kind of shooting arrows in their direction a little bit, and not right at them, but kind of, hey, I'm here, and I still have some leverage here.
Yeah, which is, I'd say, very on brand for him based on what I've seen.
It's very on brand, and not to be wonky, but it's also very on brand for the inherent instability that the Constitution sets up in those relationships.
Right.
I mean, it's much more exceptional that those three are all on the same page historically, than the norm of the built-in friction manifesting itself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just thinking of the constituencies that elect, those two leaders when you're, I mean, it was essentially a majority of Democrats who got Burrows into that position, and Dan Patrick's there because he is better than anyone else in the state at reading the kind of the tea leaves on the right. So those are, to your point, there's always going to be some tension just by, the folks who are getting these two leaders into their positions.
Yeah,
right?
what the roots of, how the roots of their power expressed in the selection process. I think that's right. So, okay, I want to talk a little bit about some media stuff. But before we get to that, what else are you seeing? Like, what do you're spending a lot of time in the building, sounds like, in the lieutenant governor's office. Look at you. I don't know where you guys had the interview, but
no, he brought us
I
in.
assume he didn't come to you.
Yeah, no, he's not at our beck and call by any means. Yeah.
And I don't want to, lieutenant governor is a very strategic thinker, so I'm not saying all of a sudden, you're on the Christmas card list or something.
Right.
But what else are you watching that's a little more below the radar? Other things that you're keeping an eye on. Other things kind of as a unit you guys are watching, but you in particular, like you're walking in the building, you're kind of, what are you watching these days?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind, I don't know if this is top of mind for everyone, but I've sort of by default been covering a lot of the, like, I guess the sin issues, like related to, put THC in that category, but also gambling, sports betting, and this stuff with the lottery, and that's another area where Dan Patrick's centrally involved, trying to crack down on the state lottery. I mean, I'm fascinated by just, it's hard to miss like all this army of lobbyists that especially Las Vegas Sands, kind of the main casino gambling legalization advocates are sending to just descend on the Capitol every 2 years. It's kind of becoming a routine at this point. And I'm interested in how, this kind of the shakeup with the lottery, Dan Patrick putting his considerable muscle behind, potentially even just doing away with the lottery outright. I think he's been clear saying that that's on the table. I think it's interesting to look at how that is affecting, the odds for these gaming interests, because they have, they've struggled to kind of make a dent. They were never going to get anywhere in the Senate. I think we all knew that, but kind of the whole ballgame for them was to just incrementally move the ball forward in the House. And I think the kind of just the vibe with the lottery has colored the whole, everyone sort of puts these issues in the same basket. And it's just fascinating to see all the money that is poured into these lobbyists, and it could end up being a step or two backwards this session, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I reasonable people can disagree, and people have disagreed with me as I've had conversations with them. But it's hard for me to not feel like the instant the lottery thing came up, that the lieutenant governor saw the opportunity for kind of a bank shot here, to start talking about, the difficulty of regulating even this thing this form of gambling that's been in existence and is institutionalized.
Right.
And he doesn't necessarily have to say, and so, the and so follows so naturally onto the other things that would almost be malpractice if that wasn't part of the strategy, if you were opposed to gambling.
You would think so. Yeah, for sure.
I think the other thing that's interesting about that, you talked about the pages and pages of lobby registrations for the Sands. I don't want to be cynical, but a cynic might say, well, it's almost certain that the people giving advice to their clients in this space have been saying for a long time, this is the long game, it's going to be multiple sessions. And while I'm sure they'd rather get it done and have the feather in their cap and et cetera, a step backwards is, a step forward if you've got a contract in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a fair point to make. And
I'm not suggesting anything nefarious, but structurally, when you're involved in a big issue like this and you're hired on,
right,
and it's going to take a lot of section, the setbacks are frustrating, and you are fighting the battle. And as a warrior, you're. Yeah. And I know from seeing some of the people with these contracts shortly after this all broke up, they were not happy in any way.
Right.
But structurally, it's going to be interesting to see how long, the hiring spree continues. Right. In the lobbying space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and Sands has, they did not expect this to be like an easy ride by any means. This was, I'm sure, was kind of baked into their game planning from the outset. And I'm also interested in just how this all plays into the 2026 primaries. Just if you think about, the same folks who are sort of spending these unlimited amounts of money on the lobbyists, it stands to reason that, maybe they'll, I think we did see Miriam Adelson get at least sort of dip her toe into the water a little bit last primary session in the House. And, I think Governor Abbott kind of set the tone and maybe opened the floodgates a little bit for what we should expect, as far as just that sheer amount of like outside activity, outside spending in these House races, which traditionally are, it's more than your average city council race, but we're not talking, traditionally it hasn't been these like
big 7-figure, expenditures, which we now see more routinely is a little strong, but
right. So that's, to your point earlier about just how the 2026 considerations kind of in some ways color everything that's happening at the ledge right now. I mean, this is yet another example of that.
So let's talk about that. Let's just direct that head on. So we're looking at 2026. We know the comptroller's race is going to be open.
Right.
Not decided, but a lot of anticipation that the AG race may be open. This is, to my mind, even if the governor and the governor, I think, is running again.
Right.
Lieutenant governor, I think, is a little more question, though, certainly take him at his word.
Sure.
Right now he's saying he will run again. But just opening up the AG and the controller's office really opens the floodgates, it seems to me, because of the ripple effects on people wanting to run.
Right. I think so. And it's also just adding to the equation, like the kind of the pent up, how stagnant things have been for, I guess since 2014. I mean, this is the first example of a true vacancy like that, aside from the Ken Paxton primary that we saw, and then the land commissioner office opening up. But
a couple railroad commissioner seats here and there, but those are not, look, those are important, but
right. Kind of these
and no insult to the railroad commissioners, but they're not marquee races.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And I think, so just all that like pent up, folks maybe being in positions a term or two longer than they would like to are going to be chomping at the bit to run for either of those two offices. And absolutely that has ripple effects down. I mean, I at least, in the Senate, I think that has traditionally been kind of the launch pad for a lot of these statewide races, looking at, where Ken Paxton and Glenn Hanger are the two current occupants came from. And, everyone's throwing all kinds of names around. I mean, I would be surprised if we don't see, multiple Senate folks, throwing their hat in the ring for either of those two offices. And then the question comes down to, do those senators have to give up their seats, and how big of a ripple effect do we have? But
who's got a free pass and who doesn't?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things about it is that, the thing itself that, we're going to have competitive primaries in 26. I mean, I think for a long time I felt like the Democratic side was going to be pretty active too. I still think that, but I also think it's a little hard to read what's going on with Democrats everywhere right now because there's just so much disorientation. And
kind of still reeling from the sucker punch, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And so it's a little harder to read, but I mean, I think if you look at, there are Democratic state senators that I think would like to throw their hats in the ring and check it out.
Definitely.
That have not run statewide, that have a free pass in 26. And I think you got to watch that. And if the AG's race loosens up, and if Paxton winds up entering the Senate primary, rightly or wrongly, I think Democrats will see him as more vulnerable than your average Republican.
Sure.
Because their argument would be that, his overall polling numbers, while they're very strong among Republicans, are not as strong as one might think or Republicans might hope among the general electorate.
Right. Which, and to be fair, we've heard similar overtures like that before, and it's at least thinking back to the last time Paxton was on the ballot, it was he was just almost as big of a blowout as all the other statewide. So
right, no, he definitely was. I mean, he did not get too exempted or he was not kept off the wave.
Exactly,
I think that's right. That's an interesting point. So let's talk a little bit about media and. It's a little unfair to you. I'll stipulate that because you're not formally moved up. But I'm gonna assume that you had not been moved up if you didn't have some thoughts in this area.
Yeah. No. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about where you think, as of now, the Texas Tribune kind of fits into the media ecosystem, particularly in the political world. There's been a lot of evolution there, and I'm interested in your thoughts because you're not. At this point, you haven't been like a Tribune lifer, right? You worked for the competition for a few years beforehand, and I think that gives you an potentially interesting perspective on where the Tribune fits in and where things are now. So kind of what do you make of it? I mean, obviously it's part of the broader media environment with all this change and the partisanship and perceptions, et cetera.
Right.
But I'm just wondering about how you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of different ways to tackle that. I mean, I think just to your point, I have mostly been observing the Tribune as an outside admirer for going back for most of the over 7 years I've been in the state, and I think one thing I have noticed just kind of over time is, to me, it feels like the Tribune has shifted a little bit. I really thought of them as more of the kind of the consummate insider, publication right alongside Quorum Report, where that was, the MO. And people at the Capitol still read us. We still want to be their go-to, source for news. And the fact that we, don't have a paywall, I think I love how accessible our reporting is to everyone. But, I think we have been more intentional about, I say we, in the years since I've been at the Tribune, but also the organization going back a number of years now has been more intentional about taking our reporting outside the Capitol, centering more of our stories around just the lives of everyday Texans, how, what happens at the Capitol is, playing out and affecting the 30 million folks who live here. And that's something I want to continue thinking about as politics editor when I move into that role. Just it's, we want to be the publication that Senate and House staffers are reading, and we want to be talking to all those folks. But we also, I don't want to take our eye off the ball for what our real purpose is, which is informing Texans about what's happening under the Pink Dome and in Washington as well. Not just kind of in a palace intrigue sense, to put it crudely. But I've also, just as a reporter, encountered firsthand, it is sort of in vogue these days to, especially in a Republican-dominated state, to, make the media something of a punching bag, or, I've definitely noticed just, we have to work a little extra harder these days to, get Republican voices represented in our stories the way that I would like as a reporter. And I think, some of that trend is maybe overstated a little bit. Like a lot of the people who, maybe not a lot, like at least some of the people who will, badmouth us in public will turn around and talk to us, that same afternoon. And that's great. But, I think it's kind of on us right now as an organization, and it'll be on me as I move into this editor role to just be thinking creatively about how to confront that challenge. And also, I think it's just, we've had some staff turnover. Some of this is just a matter of, building trust over, a number of years, just, showing up, being present, doing reporting that, establishes to folks on both sides of the aisle that you can be trusted. It's kind of, a slow burn sometimes. And I'd love to bring some people on as we're filling out this politics team who are going to, stick around for a little bit and build up that trust and sourcing at the Capitol.
That was all very well put. If I was to be more blunt, I mean, it seems to me what's sort of sitting there on the table is that there came a point, it's hard for me to say exactly when it happened, maybe a couple of sessions ago, where the mood towards the Tribune at the Capitol really turned, and there was just, it was kind of an article of faith among a lot of conservatives that the Tribune was biased against conservatives.
Right.
I mean, that's my perception. Is that fair?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm not talking about the conclusion, but
right.
But I'm not misreading that, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, I also would have trouble pinpointing the exact moment, but been at least for a couple sessions now where that's sort of been a bit of the vibe. Yeah.
You talked about working harder to get more, you said, used the term Republican, conservative, whatever, points of view into the stories. Is that, do you think the degree to which that's almost, I don't want to put words in your mouth, a little bit remedial, how do you think that happened? What's the mix of that happening maybe unconsciously and there being a conscious effort on the parts of some people to kind of shut reporters out?
Right.
What's the mix?
Well, I think
there's a chicken egg question here, maybe,
but it's a bit.
You have to be careful about the premise, and I don't want to put a premise in your
mouth. No.
But
I think the second point you made, especially about I think that gets at how irrespective of how conservative folks on the right side of the aisle feel about our coverage, there's just been this overall trend. I'm not breaking any news here of just and really on the left too, but I think especially on the right of conservative politicians and folks in the political sphere identifying these other avenues to get their message out without having to go through the mainstream media, whether it's legacy print newspapers, these up and coming online nonprofits, whatever the case, there are just so many more like endless ways to connect directly with constituents without going through, what I'm sure perceive as sort of a filter that's inconvenient to them. So that's, no matter how fairly or accurately or diligently we cover the Capitol, that will always be a reality that we're confronting. And to an extent, I can't, blame them. And, I wish they talked to us more, but it's like, if the options are available, we always think about like when LBJ would sort of the cliche, he used to call the reporters, over to his ranch and sort of thinking about like the good old days when everyone was just, there was all this access. And it's like, I imagine if LBJ had all these, the avenues that are available now, he would be taking advantage of that too, I think. So I don't know, it's kind of a silly example, but that the point is like, it's tough for us to get around. And I think I would just go back to, some of it also is like, we need to, make sure that our reporters are sticking around at the Trib, and that, sometimes it's just a matter of establishing to skeptical folks that, we're just like, we're humans, you see my byline, but, I actually exist in real life too. And I don't wake up in the morning thinking about, what kind of...
How to foment the revolution.
Right. What kind of messed up angle am I going to pursue today? it's just sort of being there and putting in the work. And so I do think a lot of it too just comes down to like, thinking of Patr Svitek, one of the former politics reporters at the Tribune, when he left the organization, I guess it was around a year ago now, the reaction, on both sides of the aisle was pretty much uniformly like, positive. He had a fantastic reputation as a diligent, fair, well-sourced reporter. And some of that was, he was here for like 9 years. I mean, that's just, I think, part of the secret sauce, but yeah.
You're getting people to trust, be familiar with you and trust you. And that takes a lot of iterations, I think.
For sure.
It takes somebody talking to you and off the record and feeling like you didn't burn them, you heard them,
right?
The view got in, things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm hopeful that, we were talking about the lieutenant governor talking to us the other day. I think that makes me hopeful that we'll get more engagement with some of the statewide folks too. Like Speaker Burrows has been, he's done not a ton of media availability, but he's it's not a total black box either. And even with the governor's folks and just his availability to talk one-on-one with us, it's kind of been hit or miss, but I guess I'm hopeful that, as we especially build up our new politics team and bring in, I think we have a great crop of applicants to replace some of our outgoing.
Because you guys are advertising for 2 spots now. It's basically, is that what, I assume that's basically your spot and James Barragan's spot.
That's right. Well,
with James now at Capitol
and then
tonight.
also Rob Downen, one of our other politics reporters, jumped over to Texas Monthly. So we did bring on Kayla Guo to fill one of those 3 openings with having to backfill my spot as well. So, but yeah, hopefully we'll replenish, rebuild our team before, I'm kind of dancing between these 2 roles of being a reporter and also a incoming hiring editor. So I'm just as eager as anyone else in the newsroom to get staff back up. Yeah.
Alternating between committee hearings and job interviews.
Exactly. That's pretty much my daily schedule these days.
Well, you're holding up well, my friend.
Well, thank you.
Let's finish. I want to finish by just enjoying being able to ask you this, unless the other way on. So, anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, do I say that at the end of our interviews? Yeah, I feel like I probably do.
Well, you almost certainly have at some point.
I always feel bad asking that, but sometimes I get my best stuff coming out of those.
Well, that's why it works.
So
yeah,
that's why I do it.
I mean, it really works if you can do it with the Davy Joe Montgomery approach, which is, you know,
let's hear the impression.
Wow, this has been really great, Jim. You know, anything else? You know, this is really, I wouldn't have thought of any of this. Is there any? And then you almost inevitably say something you shouldn't.
Yeah. I feel like that might be my cue to not say anything in this case, just learning from the best. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, Jasper, thanks a lot for coming. We really appreciate it. And, you know, maybe hope to have you back after you start over there again.
That'd be great.
If not before.
Yeah, sounds good.
So thanks to Jasper for being here. As always, thanks to our excellent audio production team in the Dev Studio, the College of Liberal Arts here at UT Austin. And of course, thanks to you for listening. And we'll be back soon with another Second Reading podcast from the Texas Politics Project. The Second Reading podcast is a production of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin.